Hi boys and girls, this is your math e-learning lesson for Tuesday, May 19th. Today we're going to be looking at lesson 131, adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. In the past we looked at adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators, which meant that the denominators stayed the same and you simply needed to add or subtract the numerators. Today we're going to be looking at what we do when those denominators are not the same, they are unlike. And so what you need to do when you have unlike denominators is you need to change them so that both fractions have the same denominator, and then you can add or subtract. Also, in the past when we were working with fractions, you learned that to rename a fraction, you always multiply by a fraction named for 1. So we're going to be using that today as we change these unlike denominators to like denominators. We're going to remember that we're going to be using fraction names for 1. That's what we'll be multiplying by. So we start out, and if we have this problem here, 1/4 plus 3/8. First of all, we're going to want to write it vertically. That just makes it easier as we are changing the denominators, as we are creating those equivalent fractions. Okay? It makes it a little bit easier to do it this way. So we have that 1/4 and 3/8, which we're going to be adding. We know that we can't add them right now because they have unlike denominators, so we need to change that. So when we take a look, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do maybe to one of those denominators to equal the other? So for example, we can see here that we have 4 and 8. And you know that with 4, if you multiply 4 by 2, that will give you 8. So in this case, we're going to keep the 8th and we're going to change our fourths into eighths. How many fourths equal the eighth? So what we do here is we say, what do we do to the 4 to get 8? We multiply by 2, which means we'll multiply the numerator by 2. Again, you have that 2 halves, that fraction named for 1. So to change fourths to eighths, we would multiply by 2. So 4 times 2 equals 8, and then 1 times 2. Okay, 1 times 2 equals 2. So 1/4 is equal to 2/8. Since we're keeping the eighths here, this obviously is just going to stay the same. Okay, we're keeping the eighths, the 3/8, that stays the same. And here we're changing fourths into eighths. And we do that by multiplying by that fraction named for 1. And in this case, we're using 2 halves. 4 times 2 equals 8, and 1 times 2 equals 2. Now you can simply add 2/8 plus 3/8 equals 5/8. Let's do another example. 5/6 minus 1/2. So we want to start by writing it this way, vertically. 5/6 minus 1/2. So you first need to take a look at the two denominators that you have and look to see, is there some way that those two numbers are related? How are those two numbers related? How do they go together? And if we look, and again, you're always thinking of your multiplication facts. You have halves and sixths. You should be able to recognize that 2 times 3 equals 6. 2 times 3 equals 6. So what we're going to do then is we'll keep our 6, which means 5/6 stays 5/6, and we're going to just change the half into 6. What do you do to 2 to get to 6? You multiply by 3, and then we multiply the numerator by 3. There's your fraction named for 1, 3/3. 2 times 3 equals 6, and 1 times 3 equals 3. 1/2 is equal to 3/6. Plus, you may have even been able to eliminate that step, knowing that every time the numerator is half of the denominator, it equals 1/2. So 1/2 equals how many 6? 3/6, because 3 is half of 6. So here we have 5/6 minus 3/6, which equals 2/6. All right. Let's go to the practice. I wrote down the practice problems here so that we can then write them vertically. And again, after we do a few together, I think you'll have a better understanding of how to do it. Again, it's not difficult. Sometimes it's just hard to see that connection, and how do you know what to multiply by? First of all, remember that you're always multiplying by a fraction named for 1. Here we have 1/2 plus 2/6. You know that you're going to have to change one of your fractions. Okay, one of those denominators needs to be changed. The other is going to stay the way it is. How do you know? That's always the question. Well, how do you know what to change it to? Again, you have to look at both of those denominators. Here we have 2 and 6. Think about how 2 and 6 are related in terms of multiplication. What do you multiply 2 by to equal 6? You multiply 2 by 3. So because you can multiply onto the 2 to equal the 6, we're going to keep the 6. And then we'll change the halves to 6. So we're keeping the 6, 2 6 stays 2 6, and we're changing the halves into 6. 2 times 3 equals 6, so therefore we have to multiply the numerator also by 3. There's your fraction name for 1, 3/3. So 2 times 3 equals 6, and 1 times 3 equals 3. And then you add 3 6 plus 2 6 equals 5 6. The next one in your practice, B, is 1/3 plus 1/9. Okay. Look at your denominators. You have thirds and ninths. How are thirds and ninths related? How is 3 and 9? How are 3 and 9 related? What can you do? You multiply 3 by 3 and it equals 9. So you're going to keep your ninths. So 1/9 is going to just stay the same. 1/9 equals 1/9, and you're going to change your third into ninths. What do you do to 3 to get 9? You multiply by 3. 3 times 3 equals 9, and then do the same thing to the numerator. 1 times 3 equals 3. So now you have 3/9 plus 1/9 equals 4/9. Problem C. 1/8 plus 1/2. 1/8 plus 1/2. Look at that relationship between the 8 and the 2. You're always asking, what can you multiply by to equal the other? So here, 2, what do we multiply 2 by to equal 8? We multiply 2 by 4. So we're going to keep the eighths then. So 1/8 equals 1/8. And now we're changing the half into eighths. 2 times 4 equals 8. Therefore, 1 times 4 equals 4. Now you add 1/8 plus 4/8 equals 5/8. Okay, problem D. 3/8 minus 1/4. Looking at the relationship of those denominators, the 4 to the 8, you know you can multiply to the 4 to equal 8. Therefore, we keep the eighths. That stays the same. And we're going to change the fourths to eighths. 4 times 2 equals 8. 1 times 2 equals 2. So now 3/8 plus 2/8 equals 5/8. All right, again, there's always going to be one fraction that's going to stay exactly the way it is, stays exactly the same, and it's the other one that you're changing. And remember that in order to figure out what you're going to change it to, you have to look at the relationship of both of the denominators, the 2 and the 6. One of them you need to be able to multiply to it to equal the other. So here you have 2 and 6. You know you can multiply to the 2 by 3, and it's going to equal 6. So that's why you change it to the 6. Here you have 3 and 9. You're looking at that relationship between the 3 and the 9. What are you going to be able to multiply one by to equal the other? I can multiply by 3, the 3 by 3, to get ninths. So that's why you keep the ninths. All right, we have two more examples to do together. We have problems E and F. So problem E, we have 2/3 minus 2/9. All right, and then we take a look at our denominators, 3 and 9, and we have to decide what's the relationship between 3 and 9. What can we do, which of those two denominators can we multiply by something else to equal the other denominator? So we have thirds and ninths. You know that you can multiply 3 by 3 to equal 9. So we're going to keep the ninths then. So 2/9 remain 2/9. And now we're going to change the 2/3 to ninths. What do we do to 3 to get 9? We multiply by 3. 3 times 3 equals 9, and 2 times 3 equals 6. So now we have 6/9 minus 2/9, which equals 4/9. And then the last one is 7/8 minus 1/2. 7/8 minus 1/2. First thing you need to do is look at the two denominators and look at the relationship of those two numbers. We have halves and eighths. You need to ask yourself, which of these two denominators can you multiply something to so that it equals the other denominator? So we have 2 and 8, and we know that we can say 2 times 4 equals 8, so we can make eighths. So we're going to keep the eighth that we have. 7/8 stays 7/8. And now we're going to change the half into eighths. And what do? 2 times 4 equals 8, and 1 times 4 equals 4. Now we can subtract 7/8 minus 4/8 equals 3/8. Okay. All right, so in working through these problems, first off, when they're written horizontally, you're going to write them vertically. It just makes that changing of your denominators a little bit easier to see what you need to do. So you start by writing it vertically. Then you look at the relationship of the two denominators that you do have, remembering that you're always going to be multiplying by a fraction named for 1. You're always multiplying by a fraction named for 1. Here we're using 3/3. Here we have 4/4. We have 3/3 again. So you're always multiplying by that fraction named for 1. So when you're looking at the two denominators that you do have, you have to see which of those denominators can you multiply something by so that it equals the other denominator. When you see which one you're going to multiply to, for example here, 7/8 and 1/2, you know that if you multiply the 2 by 4, you're going to equal the 8 rather. So then that tells you right away they're going to keep the eighths, right? Because when you multiply 4 times 2, it equals 8. So therefore you can keep the eighths and you can change the halves into eighths. Okay, you're always going to be multiplying onto one of those fractions because, again, to get an equivalent fraction, you always multiply by a fraction named for 1. So, but the first thing here that you'll need to do is always looking at your two denominators and asking yourself, how are they related? Okay, which one can you multiply to equal the other? All right, so typically what you're going to be finding is that when you're looking at these denominators, you're going to be looking at keeping the number or the denominator that is the larger number, and then you're multiplying to the other denominator to equal the larger denominator. Okay, so that's what you'll be doing right now. So again, they're written horizontally. You're going to set them up vertically. Okay, always set it up vertically. It just makes it easier as you're looking at your multiplying and looking at those denominators. Okay, all right, and then once you have them set up, once you have those like denominators, the denominator stays the same, and again, you're just adding or subtracting the numerators, because what you're doing now is converting them from unlike denominators to like denominators. And like denominators, when you're adding and subtracting, all you have to do is add or subtract the numerators, and the denominators stay the same. This is not difficult. It's just a matter of getting used to what it is you need to look at, how you need to look at those denominators and figure out which one you're going to keep and which one you're going to convert. Remember that you're always multiplying by a fraction name for 1. So go back over the samples that were given, the examples that were given in the book. Take a look at them. Make sure you understand what you need to do. Okay. If you have any questions, you need help, please make sure you reach out to me so that I can make sure that you understand this. Okay. All right. So again, that's lesson 139. You're going to be working on numbers 1 to 30. Numbers 1 to 30. And yes, I'm aware that I skipped lessons, a couple of lessons here. We're finishing up. We're getting through all of our lessons. I just needed to take them a little bit out of order here so that I can combine a couple of lessons together that make more sense to go together. Okay, so again, that's lesson 139, numbers 1 to 30. Okay, and you need help, please make sure you reach out to me so I can help you out. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye.